All right, we're back here as we take you through the morning till 11:30 with the Giant pregame coming that way. The game switched, of course, to 1 o'clock today against the Cowboys at what should be an interesting, really an interesting setup at MetLife, just to see what the reaction is and how many fans for each team are there. I'll be fascinated to see what that looks like. We're here at Mulcahy's. We sold the place out, which was very nice. Everybody to come out. There we go. There was a digital clock, which I need, so there we go. Let me run through the games here of this week, get you updated, especially on a couple of the quarterback situations and where we are. We mentioned, obviously, what's going on with the Giants. The Jets later on this afternoon against the Broncos out there as they try to get another win under their belts. The Jets will not show you a young quarterback until they have 9 losses. Right now, they don't until they do, and if they don't this year, then you won't see anybody at McCown, who's had a pretty good season this year at quarterback. They're going to try and win any game they can and try and finish as close to 500 as they can as they try to build something. But if they get a 9th loss, they will then begin to look at somebody else at quarterback. But 9 might be interesting to see if they get there. Might not get there the last game of the season. Minnesota and Carolina, big game today. Vikings trying to lock up the 1 seed. Have played so well and gotten so much out of Case Keenum. Carolina at 8-4, I think, is the one team. If you give me those teams among Atlanta, Carolina, and Seattle, I think Carolina is the most banged up. I think they're also in the most danger of not making the playoffs. This is a very big game for them today. They're still in the hunt for the division, so is everybody else there. So is Atlanta, so is New Orleans. But this is a very big game. If the Vikings win this game, they're going to be the 1 seed in the NFC. They have a game left with the Packers where they'll get Aaron Rodgers, but this is a very big game for Carolina today, one they need to win. And as we said, they're a very banged-up team today. The Bills will start Peterman at quarterback today. His first debut wasn't a pretty one. He threw 5 picks in the first half against the Chargers. The Colts at 3-9, trying to get through this nightmare season, will probably change coaches. Even though they've played a lot of these games competitively, it's been a very different year without Luck, who has sat out the entire season and whose future there is not even 100% cemented. The Colts could wind up with the 2nd or 3rd pick and could wind up even making a deal or making some changes themselves and drafting another quarterback. I don't know if they do that, but it's at least been rumored. We'll see how that works out. The Bears are going to be having a new coach next year also. They're already they're finishing up with Fox at 3-9. They've done very little. They get the Bengals, who lost a nightmarish game last week and are out of it at 5-7. Bengals are better than that. I don't know if they'll finally change coaches. They don't like to. They're the cheapest organization in the world. They don't like to change anything. So I don't know that they will or they won't, but they should be better than they are this year at 5-7. The Packers are 6-6. Get the Browns today. They'll play the kid at quarterback one more week. They won last week despite the fact he threw for 84 yards. Rodgers is chomping at the bit. He's ready to go. He wants to come back, although it's going to be very hard for them to get to the playoffs even at 7-6 and Rodgers back, because 10-6 won't ensure them anything. They don't have a lot of tiebreakers. The Browns, as we said, say they're going to bring Hugh Jackson back next year despite the record. They've lost 30 of their last 31 games, the first team in the history of the NFL to do that. A lot of people think the Browns are going to win today against the Packers. I don't. I don't. I think the rest of the Packer team is just too sound for that to happen. I think the Browns will find a way to lose again, which is what they always do. Very big game in Kansas City today. Oakland at 6-6 against the Chiefs at 6-6. Saw the Chiefs last week. Their defense was utterly embarrassing. They had to bench Revis. They've suspended Peters today. They've lost 6 of 7. They've lost 4 in a row. Their offense played well last week. Hill made big plays. Kelsey made big plays, but they have just fallen apart. When they don't get their running game going, then the defense plays well. When they get the offense going, the defense doesn't play well. That's what losing teams do. Enormous game. The Chiefs have the Raiders today, and then they have the Chargers in prime time next Saturday night at home. Those 2 games will really tell you the story of their season. And this is a very surprising thing to happen to an Andy Reid team, to have the team collapse the way it has, losing 6 of 7 games and just looking so bad along the way. I can't tell you how bad the Chiefs' defense was last week. I mean, the Jets got 500 yards of offense against them. I mean, think about that. I mean, the Jets shouldn't be able to do that against anybody. Detroit, Stafford will start at 6-6, clinging to the smallest of playoff hopes against Tampa Bay. I think Dirk Cutt is in trouble there. There have been a lot of rumblings. If Gruden is going to go back to coach, and I don't believe he will, but if he does, I think he'd go back to Tampa. I think he lives 10 minutes from the stadium. That's where I think he would go, but I don't think he'll do it. I think he will stay out. But Tampa's had a very disappointing season on a lot of levels, and really they're much better talented 4-8. If somebody goes in there for Dirk Cutter, they'd have themselves a good team. Niners won their second game last week when they beat the Bears in Chicago. They get Houston, which has had a very disappointing season once Deshaun Watson went down. One thing to remember here with the Niners is as they go down these last couple of weeks, Garoppolo wants to win games. He won last week. He's 3-0 as a starter in his career. So he won last week, and he was impressive doing it. Let's see what he does this week against Houston. He might win again. And the Niners don't care about moving up as a couple of slots as far as the draft goes because they have their quarterback. They traded for him, and I think they got a winner in Garoppolo. I think he's going to be a very, very big quarterback in the next decade. Tennessee at 8-4 against Arizona. Dangerous game for Tennessee. This is a game they have to be careful about. Arizona's still got enough players to be a pain in the neck. This is a game Tennessee needs to win to keep pace, but it's not an easy game. Washington in L.A. to take on the Chargers. Chargers could become the second team in the history of the NFL to make the playoffs after starting 0-4. They're 6-2 in their last 8. They're playing very, very solid football. I wasn't impressed with them last week against the Browns. They won 19-10, but they did move the ball up and down the field. They just settled for a bunch of field goals. Missed a couple of them. They should have scored a lot more points. They didn't, but they moved the ball all day. They've been playing very well, and right now they're the best team in that division at 6-6. They have a big game, as we said, with Kansas City next week. Seattle at 8-4 is playing well enough to make the playoffs, and Wilson's playing very well. He's been the best fourth quarter quarterback in the league this year. They get Jacksonville at 8-4, so big game here today. A hard game to figure. Seattle on the road against Jacksonville, which is still hurting a quarterback and good everywhere else. Big key today will be the Jacksonville pass rush against Seattle and whether or not they can cause a lot of problems with that offensive line. Seattle will not run it on Jacksonville. The question is, will Wilson be able to make enough plays? I would not be surprised if Jacksonville wins that game today. Sunday night, you got Baltimore at 7-5 playing better, but I don't like anything about their offense. And they get the Steelers, who have to be, and by their own admission, looking ahead to the game of the year next Sunday, which will be played at 4:25. That will be the Pats and the Steelers. That's for everything in the AFC next week. They both have primetime games this week. One difference is the Pats don't go ahead while the Steelers have hit the Pats for a month. So we'll see how things work out there. The Steelers at 10-2 came back and won that game last week. The terrible story of Shazier, which we don't know anything more about. I'm sure you'll see this on the pregame shows and on all the different shows you watch today, whatever time you watch one. I'm sure you'll see something about Shazier and about what's going on. We have not been given anything that is declarative. We haven't been told anything that is positive. We haven't even heard if he has any movement in his lower extremities. There were reports early that he did, but those were not true. They were not official, and there's been no official word of any kind. He did have spinal stabilization surgery earlier in the week. It's a terrible injury, probably career-threatening, but right now you're not even worrying about that. You're worried about whether he can walk again. What impact that has on the Steelers tonight, be interesting to see, and what effect it has against Tom Brady next week, because they have never played well against Brady. The Pats will play tomorrow night against Miami. Listen, Miami just lost to him a couple of weeks ago. You don't expect Miami to beat him, although this has been a one building where Tom Brady's had his troubles during the year. This has been a place where he's had a peculiar number of bad games have been in Miami. Miami's done very well against them down there. In the years where they've had dominant years, they sometimes have stumbled in Miami, so it's always been a little bit of a danger spot for them. Dolphins beat the Broncos last week. They're a little bit up and down. Their offense has been shaky. You know, the Pat defense, after opening the season in embarrassing fashion, has played so much better, really amazingly better in recent weeks. It's played just tremendously well. And surprising how they've been able to kind of piece that defense together. They've done a very good job of that. So that's where we are as far as today's game. So really big games in the NFC. I left one game that I wanted to get to, which I think is the most interesting game today, and that's the Eagles and the Rams. And amazingly, the game has shifted where the Rams were favored on Friday. Now the Eagles are favored now, which surprised me. I didn't see any reason for that. I didn't see any injury for the Rams that would change things. But this is a very big game for the Eagles today. A big game for the Rams too. But you want to see if the Eagles, who stayed out on the West Coast after losing to Seattle, if they're good enough to win this type of game. They have not played that many winning teams this year. They have lost to a couple of them they've played. They have dominated a division that's been down. Cowboys have been down a little bit. The Giants have been down a lot. So are the Eagles for real? Are they ready to be a top team in the NFC? Now you have these two teams with young coaches, one very young, but inexperienced coaches. Very big game. Second-year quarterbacks who were really analyzed and really pitted against each other from the day of the draft last year on forward. Both have played well this year. As a matter of fact, while Wentz has gotten so much attention all year and has been a top MVP candidate, in recent weeks, the Ram quarterback has played exceptionally well. If you look over the last 4 games, he's played really well. He's cut down his mistakes. He's cut down his interceptions. He's been getting in the end zone. So he has played really well, and the Rams are a dangerous, dangerous team. And they're playing, I think, better on all 3 levels than the Eagles are. I think the Eagles are dangerous with the quarterback and the pass rush. But other than that, I think the Rams are the sounder team, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens today. And if the Rams win this game today, there's a good chance the Eagles might not even have a bye. They could wind up being the 3 seed. Or I'm not going to say the 4, but at least the 3. And you could have the Rams and Minnesota be the 1 and the 2. Going into the playoffs with Minnesota 1 and Rams 2. So this is a very important game on a lot of levels for the psyche of the Eagles, and really it'll tell you a lot about where these young teams and these young quarterbacks are. Then there's some different names in the NFC when you think about quarterbacks this year. Think about the names you're thinking about. You're thinking about Wentz and Case Keenum and guys like that. Very different. And you still have Breeze and Matty Ice and those guys to deal with, but for the most part, there's no other, Rodgers probably won't be in the playoffs, no Manning in the playoffs, no Cowboys in the playoffs. So when you look at it, it's going to be some new faces and some very young, untested quarterbacks in the NFC, probably being joined by the old man and Drew Brees, because the Saints will probably be able to find their way in. I think Carolina is the team to watch there, but really 2 pivotal games, Minnesota at Carolina and the Rams at the hosting the Eagles today. 2 critical games in the NFC. We got injuries to get to. Doc O'Brien's here today, so he's going to come on and join me live. He'll do that at the top of the next hour. We got to get to some other things. We get to some injuries, some picks. We have the Army-Navy game to get to, and I'll touch on some more about this epic trade which stunned baseball and angered a lot of baseball as a lot of fact. It wasn't the Yankees' fault. The Yankees didn't go shopping for Stanton. Stanton basically got dumped in their lap for at a bargain basement price because they had no way otherwise to get him out of Miami. It became an ugly situation for the Marlins. They really wanted to get him out of there. They needed to get him out of there economically, and they wound up really boxed into a corner, and they went to a team they knew could deal with it in the Yankees, and there's even talk now that they might trade Castro. As a matter of fact, the Mets supposedly are interested, so he might not even stay very long. Looks like they want to clean house completely. Jeter did say to me last week he was going to be patient. He might be very patient with that franchise. They might ask the few fans they have down there to be extremely patient. Back after